In recent weeks, the US has dispatched 8 warships and a submarine to the southern Caribbean. An anti-drug operation, it says, that has already seen 3 vessels blown up and those on board killed. Venezuela fears that the military buildup could be a precursor to attacks on its territory. US President Donald Trump is no fan of his Venezuelan counterpart, leftist Nicolas Maduro, questioning his re-election and calling, in fact, Maduro illegitimate. Maduro has called for an increase in his country's defences and thousands have joined a civilian militia in response. But Venezuela's opposition praised Trump and his actions. It's not just Venezuela that is under the US radar, however. Colombia too has been blacklisted by Washington for what it calls flawed anti-drug efforts. Well, to get more insight on all that is happening over there, we can speak now with lecturer in Latin American Studies at Newcastle University, Nicholas Morgan. Thanks so much for your time. Can I start simply by asking you, this military deployment, how significant is it?
Well, it's hard to tell. I mean, I suspect it's what at one time we would have called saber-rattling rather than, a serious likelihood of some kind of US military intervention in Venezuela right now. A lot of US policy vis-a-vis the region seems to be working at a very kind of basic level. And I think these attacks are also related to that. It's an exercise of raw power. There's a lot of threat. There's a lot of bullying, I would call it. I think that's probably, some people would object to that term, but I think it's probably the best term to use. And I think a lot of this is also for domestic consumption as well. Yes, for the Trump administration.
Is there weight in those accusations that Trump is actually trying to oust leftist Nicolas Maduro?
Well, Trump's no fan of the Maduro regime. The US hasn't been a fan of the Maduro regime for a long time. Whether they are serious about effecting regime change right now is another matter. I mean, the US continues to import about a quarter of Venezuela's oil production. I mean, sanctions were loosened prior to Trump's arrival in the White House. I guess if the US is really serious about doing something about regime change, then we'd probably see a shift there. But at the moment, I think this has got more to do with posturing than any kind of immediate likelihood of a serious US attempt to effect regime change in Venezuela, which would probably be difficult anyway.
It looks so far, in fact, that these actions could have boosted Maduro's support at home.
Well, yes, I mean, Maduro depends on a kind of hostile US, right? I mean, so much of the regime's propaganda, if you like, depends on this notion of being a state that is embattled, that is patriotic, that represents the popular classes against these kind of, attempts by a hostile foreign power to direct Venezuela's, internal policy. And though that's not entirely untrue, it's also a great alibi for the many failures of the Venezuelan government over recent years as well.
And of course, it's not just Venezuela that seems to be under the radar of the US in this latest move. We also saw Colombia, also led by a left-wing president, but it was delisted by the United States, saying, that it really has failed in this war on drugs. What do you make of that?
Well, again, I think so much of US policy is governed by how they see the political color of a particular administration, rather than on the realities of something which is really complex, which is how the whole drugs trade works, right? I mean, the role of US companies and interests in laundering drugs money is extremely significant, but we don't hear much talk about that. And given the fact that Gustavo Petro is, someone who would be recognized as a leftist, I mean, I'd call him a centrist, really, but he's recognized as a progressive president anyway, and he's been in frequent disagreement with Trump on a whole range of issues. I think that's got more to do with the current decertification than the actual realities of what's happening, in drug production in Colombia. There is a significant difference of opinion between the US and Colombia on these matters. The current Colombian government wants to focus on dealing with drug shipments, and there's been an increase in the capture of drug, the seizure of drug shipments under the Petro regime. At the same time, the US would prefer to have an emphasis on the eradication of crops, which is something that Petro doesn't want to do because he sees that as probably having the greatest impact on the people who are the most vulnerable in the drugs trade, who are those who are actually, involved in producing the drugs in the first place. So peasants, I guess, we would call them.
And you speak there of, arresting drug smugglers, intercepting the boats, but we've seen the US absolutely take them out to kill the people that were on board. I mean, does the US have the right to do this in these waters?
Yeah, well, I'm smiling about that, but ironically, I mean, it's a deeply disturbing development, isn't it? I mean, this is extrajudicial killing. These are people who are being given the death penalty without any due process. And it really does make a mockery of any notion of international law. I mean, I know the US hasn't signed up to the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, but US legal advice suggests that they should comply with it. And this kind of blatant intervention that leads to this loss of life, without any due process. We don't really know yet who those people were, in spite of the fact that the US tells us that they have solid evidence that they were members of the Tren de Aragua criminal organization, which is debatable in itself, I guess. Whoever these people were, they probably, it is hard to justify extrajudicial killing in international waters.
Indeed. Nicholas Morgan of Newcastle University, thanks so much for your time and joining us here on France 24.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Much appreciated.